So I'm Kevin Basarab. I've been with MediaCurrent for about a year now, and my experience comes from a lot of publishing background as well. I work for Morris Communications out of Augusta, Georgia. Was lead developer on the Florida Times Union site and a lot of the Morris property websites as well. With MediaCurrent so far, I've been working with a newspaper in Alaska called the Alaska Dispatch, and in Jamaica, the Jamaica Gleaner Company, and some other media sites as well. So what we're going to talk today a bit more about is how to do Drupal for publishing houses. We're not going to go into code or anything like that too much. It's going to be a lot more theory, so if you want hardcore code, go ahead and just leave. Everyone's not going to leave. So today's mission is to provide a baseline architecture for a newsroom site from which publishers can customize from. We're gearing this toward users of all user experience and give a broad overview of the baseline architecture, and that way you can take those ideas and things that publishers are looking for in their site and expand from there to meet that specific client's needs. Obviously with any client, not all publishing houses are the same. There's a lot of the same core needs that they have or things that they don't realize they need. And we're going to look into options that they have that might say, oh wait, that was a great idea, or why didn't I think of that before? But this isn't a 100% recipe. It's not going to apply to all clients. There might be bits and pieces that work for some, bits and pieces that work for others, some that might not apply to any. Although I'm sure you'll find one or two things in it that should apply to everybody. So the why. Well, we want to make the editorial process simpler. Publishing houses are under a bunch of time crunches. You've got deadlines, you've got newspapers to put out, breaking news coming in, things of that nature. So you're under a lot of time crunches. We want to speed up any workflows that might be out there on the site. We don't want to bog down the user with tons of different requirements. This would allow for quick publishing, and then you can add additions later on. Some of the things we like to do, especially on enterprise level sites, is you have a lot of required fields on your node add forms. And why force a user to add all these extra fields when really to get something to publication you only need a title, a byline, and a story even. We can add that other stuff later. Let's give the option to get a story out quickly and then add on features at a later time. It's the internet, it's not going to print right away. So we can go ahead and add things as we go. We also don't want to rely on user decision. Where possible, we want to automate options to speed up the processes. A lot of publishing houses in this industry, especially now in this day and age, they've cut back on a lot of their staff. Where we used to have 30, 40, 50 people working on an individual newspaper or a publishing house, now we're down to, we've cut that number in half a lot of times. So we want to speed up any process, automate where possible, and allow quick publishing again. We want to reinforce that fact, allow quick publishing, and keep the user from forgetting a different field or forgetting some piece of information they should have done. The worst thing that can happen if you're on a news site and you go to some obscure page in the back of the site that was supposed to be manually updated by somebody, and that person hasn't updated it in months, it's not going to look good for your industry at that point. Also, by not requiring different fields and adding some automation to it, if a user has to remember to click 10 different checkboxes or options in creating a story, then they're going to miss 3 or 4 of those possibly, especially if they're under a breaking news situation. They're not going to remember everything. And then the final thing we want to see in doing is allow customization. Notoriously, newspapers and publishing houses really love to have complete control over everything. That's what a newspaper is formed on, editorial judgment for the front page of a printed product. Here's the 3 stories that you really need to read today. Well, notoriously online, we're in a reverse chronological order. Everything's newest to oldest. There's no value in it unless someone pays an ad for it. There's nothing else that's pushing it to the top. It's all just based on reverse chronological order. So we want to think about the possibility of allowing customizations for them. Have some manual overrides, but still allow automation. We want to have possibilities for changing the homepage layouts in the cases of breaking news. A lot of times when you build a site, you build one layout, and that's all you have to work with. Why not give an option, whether through a GUI or either through static setups, or even through a flexible situation where you can add your own custom HTML or custom content to take the advantage of when there's a breaking news situation to change up your homepage and make that really engage the user in a different way. The news will guide the site. Be flexible to allow this. The Las Vegas Sun has done a lot of great stuff in regards to that, where instead of having 1 or 2 certain looks to the site, if the news story warrants some design, they have the flexibility to add that design in. So it's a good idea to always make sure to do that. So what options do we have to exist? Well, today we're going to cover 6 different aspects of publishing and how they're going to improve the user experience in Drupal and the publishing experience. First thing is going to be editorial workflows. At this point, we're going to cover ways to speed up the editorial workflow process, different things that will help speed up on that side of it. We're going to cover image management, how newspapers and publishing houses differ with image management compared to other sites. There's a lot of differentiations between them that we might not think about that a publishing house really needs to consider. Taxonomy architecture. We're going to look into a baseline architecture to use, and pretty much every core publishing house should probably have these taxonomies we're going to go over today, and then add on from there depending on the custom needs of that client. Automation with overrides. How to allow a constant news cycle to happen while still maintaining some editorial judgment and not forgetting about things or not leaving that random section front and the back of the site not updated for months at a time. And then as some extra pieces, we're going to look into a little bit of ideas for responsive advertising. All of our sites now are going to responsive design. You should probably be doing it if you haven't already. Well, news and publishing houses are built around advertising. There's nothing, I don't know many sites at all that do not have advertising on their site, and advertising's come in fixed positions. So we'll talk about different ways to accommodate that on your responsive site. And the last thing we'll look at is a little bit of options for caching. This is always the crutch of almost any news site. We're going to look at options for speeding it up, giving options to clear those caches in the event of breaking news or some sort of error on the homepage or things of that nature. We want to make sure to give the client ideas and ways to speed that up. So, with that being said, we'll jump into the editorial workflows. First thing we're going to look at is the rules. And this is going to be one of the best things you can do to help any editorial workflow process for a newspaper. Use the rules module. It is your friend. Make custom rule actions if you need to. Use ones that exist. One of the things that this is going to do is make any processes that would have been manual and give an automated option for that. So that way, what we talked about earlier of forgetting to fill out a checkbox or something like that, rules can take care of that for you. A couple scenarios that we have for that is to email the select editors when a story is added. But it might not need to be every story on a site. Some of these newspapers, you're cranking out 50, 60 stories a day. If you're spamming someone with an email every single time that a story is added, no one's going to look at those anymore. But why not take a story that might be tagged as a breaking news story or has a flag of some sort that it's a story that really needs to go up fast and email that specific one? Why try and spam everything? Pick and choose what needs to get seen and bring that to your editors through emails. Another way that we mentioned a little bit already was automating default values for fields if they're not filled in by the user. Something like this would be, that I like to do a lot of times, is filling in keywords for the meta tags or a custom page title for meta tags. Everyone's probably used the meta tags module before on some of your sites. If you haven't, a newspaper site's obviously the first thing you really want meta tags on there because Google and advertising are your two biggest things that are helping a newspaper site grow. So use rules, take a field that's in your content area and populate the keywords field with those keywords from a taxonomy, or populate the page title field with a custom page title for that page. This will help your user. You can have a regular title for your story. You can have an actual header SEO-friendly title, more SEO-friendly title. And if they only fill out one of them, the other one is still there for them. It'll automatically get filled in with rules. So it's a great way to look at it from there. Another thing we want to look at is the workbench moderation. This is a great module if you haven't heard of it before for advanced changing of states. So what it's going to allow you to do is set up virtually unlimited states of a node as it moves through a publication process. In Drupal, nodes by default only have a binary value. It's either unpublished or published. There's no in between. Workbench moderation allows you to add a draft status in there and as well as move an item through different editorial workflows. So an idea of that would be that you can set up a reporter that enters a story. That reporter then sends a story to the line editor or editor 1. That line editor finishes the story. They now move it to editor 2 and they can do their edits. And then when editor 2 is done or wherever workflow you have in the middle there, they can then publish it to the site at the end of that workflow. All of that can be controlled by permissions too. So what you can do is have the reporter only be able to send to an editor and not allow them to publish to the site. But at the same time, if something is live on the site and an update has to be made to it, like in the case of breaking news or any other event, you have a live story on the site. You can then create a new draft as the reporter and start that process over again without affecting the live version that's on the site. So you don't have the influx edited state on the website at that point. When using Workbench though, you want to remember to keep the workflow streamlined. The more complex you get, the more problems you're going to have. And also the harder we're going to start violating that rule we talked about earlier in terms of having, lost my train of thought, sorry. God, just had to ruin the door, Sean. So you want to keep the workflow as streamlined as possible. The more complexities you add to it, the more of a barrier that's going to become to your end users that are going to be using the site. For instance, if a reporter is allowed to publish breaking news to the site, don't limit them to having to go through a stick-step process to get through it. They really don't need that in the first place. Have the process there for them to use, but if you trust them enough, let them publish the site if that's something that they're going to need to be able to do. A motto I like to say there is don't try to abstract the workflow so much that it becomes a barrier to publication. It's a good word to live by. Always try and think about that when you're talking to a client or working on some sort of workflow idea. When you're talking through things are going to start flowing out. You're going to have ideas. You're going to think, oh, well, what if we only let the news editor edit the news section, or only let the sports editor edit the sports section? Well, what happens that day when the sports editor is in and a breaking news story comes in? Now they can't get to this, they can't edit that section. There's different things in the way. You're getting in a barrier, and people are going to be mad at the site. Unhappy users do not make for happy developers. I always like to say, because of that, and the segue to that is avoid Workbench access if possible. It becomes a barrier. There's lots of granular permissions in there. You screw something up, no one's going to have access to anything. People aren't going to have access to what they need, things like that. Always try and lean your clients and in your publishing houses into trusting your users. They were built upon editorial judgment. If you can't trust your users in that site, then your newspaper's probably got some other issues you need to look at anyways at that point. I've worked with a bunch of large newsrooms. We had, at Jacksonville.com when we were there, we had at one point 140 people in the newsroom. Any reporter, any person in that newsroom could post a story to the site without any issue. The limits we put on was who could put stuff on the homepage, but if you wanted to post a story published to the site, it was there. And even with that many people and that much quantity going through, we still had one or two editors that could keep up and read the stories pretty quickly after they were published on the site or in the review state. So don't feel like you have to limit this workflow down to make things work. The things I like to look at is using more broad roles when you're setting up your site instead of trying to make it so granular. The ideas that I look at is a reporter, a line editor, an editor, a site admin, and a global admin. This breaks up your news site into very distinct roles that can do greater responsibilities throughout the site. A reporter and everyone above that can enter stories in the site. A line editor can edit content in the stories and edit any content and not just their own. An editor can then manipulate a homepage, section fronts, any type of those manual overrides we're going to talk about later. The site admin gets into some of the more advanced usages of the site, such as roles and permissions. You obviously don't want to give those powers to anyone on the site. And then your global admin. And this is usually, nobody should have this role. It should be one that the site admin upgrades someone to for a period of time and then downgrades from that. And the reason for that is to take away options in the Drupal admin interface. We've all looked at admin/index on a Drupal 7 site. It's just this large mass of options that you have there. If you limit down the site admin role to just the features that are prevalent to day-to-day use for the newspaper, you're going to have a lot easier users to get to know the site and training of the site. And then let them upgrade themselves to the global admin if there's something they're not able to find within that. Another option that will help everything out on your site and make your users more happy is using the shortcuts bar within Drupal. This is built in the core Drupal. It allows up to 7 shortcuts at the top of your admin menu on the site. Any quick links that a user might need should be put up there, such as add in an article, any type of assignments viewers, different things you might have and need there. By default, this only allows for 7 shortcuts, like I said, but also it's only 1 global shortcuts bar for the entire site. That's not very user-friendly when you've got a site broken up into a couple user roles, just like we talked about before. We want these situated roles to look at. So there's a contrib module out that will give you shortcuts to allow a shortcut bar by role. I forgot which slide I'm on. So it's called shortcuts by role, very obvious control module idea. And this will allow you to then change that shortcuts bar out based on which role in the site. So the reporter can have very specific options where the editor might have more homepage manipulation options and things like that. If 7 isn't enough, then we're going to segue into the next slide that we're looking at in terms of custom menus or dashboards. These can be done, a lot of times I like to do these in panels if we're going to look at them, just because it's very quick and easy to add custom content to that, add menus to that, rearrange it depending on what the use case is for the site. What you can also do from that is create them for each individual role so that a user logs into the site and has a very specific dashboard to what they need to do. As much as you can streamline out the Drupal interface and bring it to a much simpler usability for them, the easier it's going to be for this user. Options to do with that is put menus on it. Use custom menus as administration tools as well. So place your add article links in there, place any node queues that are used often on the site in there. Any type of configuration that might have to be done on the site that the user needs, place that front and center on them in a very organized menu. It makes it a lot easier for that user. Custom views is another great thing to add onto these custom dashboards and panels. Things to think about adding for these is any recently added content by that user. Workbench moderation comes with some of these by default, but if you're making a custom dashboard, you probably want to put all this together onto one page. It's a great thing if a user goes in and saves a story on the site, they're not going to know how to find that again when they come back to it. But if you have a dashboard for them that shows all the content you just created or any content that's not published that you created, it's going to be a lot easier for that user to find it. For an editor, you could set up a view that's any content that's awaiting editing. A quick look so that when they log into the site, oh, I have this new article that needs to be looked at, or it might trigger something. Instead of actively making them seek out the content to be edited or checked, you bring it to them. You can also use these custom dashboards for company announcements or any information that might need to go out to the rest of your staff. This can be anywhere from information about a breaking news event or a story that's coming up to HR announcements like open enrollment, things like that. You could use this dashboard as similar to a custom intranet to help users on your site. Frequently used links, frequently asked questions, all these should be added onto that dashboard as well. Streamline what that user needs. Decide based on the client's needs what is going to be the most beneficial and build a dashboard tailored to that. And then you can go back, like I said, everything's using rules in some way or another. You can then direct the user to this page upon login. So when the user logs in, check their role, send them to this page. If you're using panels, you don't even have to check the role necessarily. You can just send them to a dashboard and let panels then choose based on the role which page you're going to see from there using the contextual filters and panels. So that covers a lot of our editorial workflows. Image management is a whole other part of Drupal that publishers need a little bit more help on than a normal Drupal site might need. Core Drupal file system doesn't really work for what publishers need to do. Why doesn't it? Core doesn't handle images without a lot of customization really well. Contrib will come to our rescue in this though. There's lots of modules out there now to help with it, and we can help out very well on that side. Some requirements that are needed for it, for newspapers, is reusable images. Core Drupal out of the box, you're uploading an image to the site. It's in the site, it's stored. How do I get it back now the next time I go? Doesn't really handle that very well. We want to look for a library of images. We also want to have some metadata associated with the image. Things such as credit, caption, taxonomy, things such as in the taxonomy tags, categories, color of the image, anything that might be useful in finding that image at a later point. You got to remember that publishers are putting up images all the time. Try and think of what you want to search for when you're going to have 50,000, 100,000 images in the database at some point. Source field as well. Any type of metadata associated with that image that could be helpful should be stored along with the image. A lot of times you want to check with the client on what legal things they need to know about their image. Many clients will have very specific legal ramifications they need to keep intact with that image, so store that with the image information and the metadata. Individual content overrides. When you're using the file entities for images, you can assign all these fields to them. Well, those fields are now global to that image. Anytime you use them on the site, it's going to have that same data available to it. Well, if you're writing a story and you're pulling an image from an archive, you might want a different caption than the caption that's originally stored with the image. So make yourself have individual content overrides. What I like to do with this is using field collections. to make this happen. Create a field collection, have your image selector in there, and at that point then add any of your individual content overrides as fields within your field collection. At that point you can take rules. If that caption field wasn't filled out, when the node gets saved, auto-populate it with the caption that was in the file entity at that point. Gives you some options there and streamlines the workflow for you as well. Any other fields you could do this for as well if there's others, but obviously always remember what we were talking about earlier. Don't over-engineer the workflow. Make sure that it's simple enough to keep maintaining for a long time. Another option to look at is always having 2 image fields. Every article should have 2 primary image fields on it when you're working with a publishing site. A main image field, which would be that field collection we talked about. This allows unlimited values. You can have 10, 20 images associated with the article if you wanted to. And then a lead image on the site. And what this lead image does is something that you wouldn't really think about unless you're working on the newspaper site, is it's used strictly for promotional purposes only on the site. A lot of times you'll have a news story that is a breaking news event. There's no image associated with it right now, but your homepage really wants art to go with it. So you can make a stock graphic, or especially TV news. Everyone's seen the TV news breaking news event with these animated graphics of horror happening, whatever it is that they're talking about. They can then use that graphic. It'll show up on the homepage with the story, but in the actual text of the story, you're not going to see that lead image. It's just used as promotional purpose. It gives a lot of flexibility. Any newsroom that I've introduced that concept to has loved it and used it a bunch afterwards. Again, one of the things we want to do there as well with something like a second image is use rules again to populate that field if it wasn't populated by the user. Automate. Take the first main image and make that the lead image on the story as well. By doing that with rules when saving an article, you're now taking the processing side out of the user display. So what we can do at that point is we take a little bit longer to process when we save the article, but each time the homepage is loaded, PHP doesn't have to process and say, hey, is there a lead image? No? Well, let me look at the main images. Let me pull the main image in. You take all that processing out. You do it one time, store it as a lead image, and now you don't have to worry about it anymore. And it lets you use the core Drupal functionality a lot easier. When you create a view, you just need to load 1 image instead of 2. Taxonomy architecture. This is the bread and butter of any news sites. Taxonomy was invented for news sites to use it, really, if you think about it. It's all categorization of stories. What was a newspaper forever? It's always been categorization of stories. So we want to base vocabularies for all newspaper sites. One of them is going to be topics, and this should be your core sections for the site. Normally, this is going to be your news, sports, entertainment, etc., whatever topics you might have in mind. But you want to use 2 fields for this that are both powered by this vocabulary. Just like we had 2 image fields before, we want to have 2 topics fields. And the power of that is that we have one that's a single select and one that's a multiple select. There are lots of modules out there for the multiple select that make it a lot easier to use too, like autocomplete deluxe, taxonomy term tree, things like that. Just give a little nicer user interface than a giant long select list of topics. But the reason behind using 2 fields is that news sites are very into analytics. Also very into breadcrumbs and what a story is associated with. Notoriously, especially if you're looking at a newspaper or someone that's just been print-based and not doing as much web, a story gets classified as one category or one topic. We don't want them to be limited to one topic on the web. We want to give a broad base to anything else. So if a story is a football player is arrested in an area of town for something, whatever it might be, then that might apply to news, it might apply to sports. If it was at like a nightclub, it might apply to entertainment. Why limit it to just the news section or just the sports section or just entertainment? Choose a primary category of what that story should really be associated with, and use that primary category for your breadcrumbs, for any analytics that you're storing about the article, things like that. And then have the multiple topics assigned that you can then pull that article into other parts of the site and be able to find it in other areas. Again, what you can do with that as well is your rules to pre-populate and populate based on what a user has done. And authors field would be the next one that obviously should be there. Many times what we think about in Drupal sites is using the user account as our authors for a story. And in core Drupal, it gets a little confusing because it's created by username, whatever that is, user admin. Well, that doesn't really help us much when we're talking about newspapers. We don't want to have our story by admin or by Drupal, by whatever the default user account is on the site, or what your user account is. So what we want to do is create a taxonomy vocabulary. It's a field of data of authors. Some of the things to include in this would be the first name, and I don't have the rest of those on the slides. Okay. Some of these would be the first name, last name, email address, biography, photo, and a thing that people forget to add in, but I always like to add it, is a user reference ID. Tie that author's taxonomy term to an actual user on the site. Not everyone's going to have it, but if you have it, you can then start using that to your advantage in other areas of the site. And things, for instance, would be pre-populating fields within an article. If you're tied to a user ID and you're logged in as that user and you create an article, pre-populate your author's field with that author's term, things of that nature. So the differences in between using a taxonomy versus users is taxonomy will allow quick additions of other terms as well besides users. The user account, you physically have to go out and create that user account. If you're creating a story on the site that's by someone from the Associated Press or something of that nature, then you can just type in their name and have the story there. You can then, whereas a user account, you have to go to another page, create the user account, come back, reference it. Lots of hassle, nothing that you really should be doing. As well as we can then add the additional fields for any authors that need them and not have to do it. Again, limit what you need to do at the baseline and allow for expansion later. Add an article in, a couple hours later or so, edit that author and add the rest of their information if you need that. There's some ways to make that easier as well. There's a references module that'll actually put edit links right on those taxonomy autocomplete fields. So that way, once you have a field in there, you save your node. Next time you edit, there's going to be an edit link down below that you can jump right in a modal window and edit that taxonomy term from the node. Streamline that process, stop having users having to go to multiple clicks. Tags is a core Drupal field. Don't delete it, use it. This should always be used for any proper nouns and subject of the story. Anything you can do to classify the story in as much of a granular way as possible, the better for down the road. There might be a breaking news event that you wrote a story about something, doesn't really seem that big of a deal, but then a week later the main subject in it died or was murdered or something of that nature. Well, now you might have a whole special section you want to put together about stories about this. So if you are tagging stories as you go, it's going to be a lot easier to find those down the road. Locations. Locations is uber important for publishing houses and what we need in them. Geolocate your stories. Anything that's about any type of location data with that story, make sure to map it in there. Google, other search engines are using location data more and more. There's metadata you can associate with it. It's going to help out a lot, as much location as you do. You might not have to display it to the user, but at least that data is there for down the road. And then automation as well. You can add additional terms with something like the Calais module or things like that for automating and pulling out locations, pulling out proper nouns into vocabularies very easily through some automation processes. They're getting better each day with how these are working. I've run into issues back and forth with them, so use at your own risk. But I always like to have some manual vocabularies to check from, and then you have the automations to choose from as well afterwards. And I'm gonna start going a little faster here. We're running out of time a little bit. So automated overrides. One of the hardest goals is automated overrides on the site. This is something that I haven't really found a perfect recipe for yet. So if any of you guys have ideas, let's talk after the session about it. Because I'm still trying to refine different ways of making this work better. Each site I tried different options, and none are great, but they all work in their own ways. One option is flags. Use the flag system that's in Drupal. You would be able to flag a node very quickly and easily for the home page or something, then it becomes available, or a rule could fire once something is flagged to add it to a home page and fire off automated processes from there. Something we all forget about is the promoted to front page option, especially if you're looking at a front page of the site. Use it. It's there in Drupal built in. We usually hide it or get rid of it or ignore it. Might as well use it if you want some array of content that's available for the home page for an editor to pick from. Use that. A reporter can flag something that's promoted to the front page maybe, and that queues it up for an editor to review for that front page. Sticky is something that, it's another core Drupal functionality. It has its place in some instances. There's some things I don't like about it too much. It's great if your views are set up to use it as a sort order, that everything will, if it's sticky, it'll automatically come to the top of the list. The problem is that it doesn't auto expire. So you have to manually go back in and remove that. You could write custom code maybe to run on cron or drush cron to remove it, but out of the box it won't auto expire for you. Draggable views. This is the one that I love, but I haven't got it to work really well in production instances. In theory, this would be my absolute preferred method of doing manual overrides with automated content. This only really works well with defined sets of data still. When I've tried to use it's a broad base of a section, so a news section. It's got 1,500 stories in it. Well, it works great when all the stories have a saved weight associated with them. But if, say, for instance, no one has saved the draggable views weights for a couple days and there's over 100 stories that don't have weights in there, things start getting funky, there's weirdness to it. The goal with it is that it works similar to NodeQ, except you don't have to add it to it. It's automated. It's an automated feed of the items to use, and then you can drag and change the weights from it. In theory, it's great. I still would love to talk to more people about it. I don't think Doug Van's at the conference this year. I'd talk to him about it some more, but in trying to find out some other ideas and ways of making this work. Node queues and sub queues are my go-to right now. Create a sub queue or an automated taxonomy node queue for all the content on your site. So for your topic section, create a sub queue architecture for that. What this allows you to do is add any node to the primary category, a queue of that primary category. You can automate that with rules as well. There's a sandbox module called node queue rules that does that. And what this will allow you to do is now get all that content into a queue and then adjust the content from there. One way that I've used this a lot is adding the node into the queue automatically, and then using a sandbox module called Node Queue Extras. It's not available. I don't think it's contrib yet. I think it's just sandbox. I could be wrong though. But what it lets you do is add a relationship to your view, and it'll look at a queue first. And if that queue runs out of data before your pager runs out, it'll then default back to the reverse chronological order. That's something that NodeQ doesn't do out of the box. It's a really great feature to have. Responsive advertising. This is something that there's not a lot of standards for this yet. It's still a very new concept. People are really working through it. The Boston Globe has become the de facto standard for this, but they're doing a lot of custom ad serving on the site with various sizes. So they've pretty much created their own ad server. Well, that doesn't really help a lot of publishing houses because they're using Google, they're using Yahoo APT, they're using different big national vendors that are out there that provide ad servers. So what I've looked at and done so far is a custom module for handling this. And basically what it allows us to do is use iframes to contain that ad position. Normally when you're using an ad server, if you try to use JavaScript to load an ad after the page is loaded, it's going to take over the entire DOM of the page and be a mess for your site. Iframes will contain it. You can pass parameters to that and then load the ad from there. This custom module allows you to add different breakpoints or different size versions of the ad, change the variables in each of the sizes. So when you hit that breakpoint, now a new set of variables get passed to that iframe, a new ad loads up. So you can take a 720 by 90 ad, and when the page hits a certain breakpoint, that iframe size changes and the ad changes to a 300 by 250. This is a custom module. It's not available to the public yet. It's something I want to help get out to contrib at some point. So if anyone wants to help work on that, let me know. We can set up a time to look at it at some point. And the last thing is caching. Publishers are not fans of caching. It's one of the worst things they hate. They despise it. You will run into more problems about this site because of caching than anything else. But caching is a necessary evil in a way with Drupal, especially on high volume sites. You're going to need to do something. And why not? There's things out there like Varnish or reverse proxies that can help you really speed up your site speed and not have to do a whole lot more work on the Drupal backend side to make that happen. So caching is great from the performance side of things, but you need to give the editors options for clearing this cache out. So a couple modules that are available for looking at it. Flush page cache is my favorite right now. This one basically just, if you're using the admin menu, the contrib admin menu that allows the drop downs, in your developer tools on that, you'll have a flush page, you have a flush all caches option, but you also have a flush page cache option. So rather than clear all your caches of Drupal out, which on an enterprise site could dramatically slow it down for that minute or two it takes to clear it, you can just clear caches associated with that page. Out of the box, it's gonna search and try and find all the views and things on that page that it needs to find. But if it's missing something, you can add custom parameters of cache tables to clear. But it gives you a quick way out of the box to clear caches for the page and move on with the rest of your life. It provides also integration with I think Memcache and Varnish and some of the external caching mechanisms as well. Cache Actions is another module that's available. This one clears caches for a node on update or specific views like the homepage on update. It integrates with rules. You can work all sorts of actions in with this so that when you edit a node, you could then say, hey, clear this homepage cache because I know this node will be in there. Or you could do a check to see if the node is in there and then clear the cache if it is, something of that nature. Another way to help automate the process without having the user take any steps. Cache Tags is a new module. One of my awesome coworkers, Damien McKenna, introduced me to this. I haven't used it yet. I'm intrigued to. Basically, the gist of it is that you can add tokens to individual caches and clear those caches based on the token. So you add metadata to a cache. So you can add a node ID, for instance, to the entity cache. You can add the node ID to a view cache if that node is in the view and other areas on the site. And then you just have to clear one cache based on that token, and it'll clear all those individual ones out. In theory, it sounds awesome. Like I said, I haven't got to use it yet. Another one I haven't got to use yet is the display cache. From what I can tell from this one, it's a sandbox module right now. The idea is to refresh caches only when the item is updated. So normally with Drupal, all of our caches expire on a time basis for the most part. This will allow you to keep that cache intact until that node is actually updated or until something actually changes. It doesn't give an expiration to it. So that's great for if you have tons of content on the site, it doesn't change very often. Why keep clearing that cache for that one poor user that gets stuck when the cache is clearing on them for that item? Give them a free choice there and something quick and easy to go through. So it's a whole lot of information, went a little bit longer than I was anticipating. We're right around 40 minutes right now, so we got 5 minutes for questions. Is there anything anyone has questions about? I've got a really fancy guide to planning and Drupal websites book here to give away if anyone has an awesome question here. It seems like it could be intriguing goes along with our basis of theory.
I wanted to go back on tags real quick and how you
Sure.
suggested the use of those.
Mm-hmm.
Proper nouns especially, can you just kind of go over that again?
Yeah, so the question is just about tagging and using proper nouns and using subject matter of your story. So the tags field notoriously is always just random. Whatever you want to put in there, you can. So I always recommend using proper nouns. So any people, places, things that are associated with your story, put those in your tags field. Because I can guarantee you at some point you're going to want to find a view or create a view based upon that person at some point down the road or one of these people in there.
How's it different, say, than using like locations separately? What's the difference between, say, mapping something out and just tagging it with a location?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the difference between tagging it and locations, really it can be either way. It really depends on what architecture you want to go through. Locations obviously are just going to be actual places. And if you're using locations well, then you don't need to put places in your tags field as well. It's duplication. You can if you want to. It doesn't hurt. It never hurts to tag more than tag more in the long run. Another option I've used for tagging before that I didn't mention during it was for internal use. So if you're not displaying your tags to the user, what you can do is put together internal lists of content. So if there's an internal project that's being worked on, there's a whole bunch of stories associated with it, you could make a unique tag for that project and then be able to pull a view in on a project page that just has those stories with that tag and use it as an internal identifier. Sometimes I've done on sites where I actually make a vocabulary for those internal tags versus public ones, depending on what the use case is.
How do you help a publisher to understand that the workflow should be simple, as you said? If you have a publisher that really tries to make it complex, apparently you don't want to build the system complex, and then they understand that it should be simpler than...
Exactly, yeah. It's a lot of just talking to them beforehand. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to build it complex, and then they realize what they got into. But definitely address it to them in the way, explain to them, hey, if you start doing this, explain to them in ways that they're going to understand. So take the example I gave of like a breaking news story, or someone's out sick, or someone gets run over by a bus. how is this other person going to be able to run the site? We want to make sure that we don't have barriers to running the site. And try and come up with a scenario based on their individual situation that would be a problem for them granulating that so much. If you can find something that's going to relate to them and show how it's going to be more time consuming or more of a problem for them, they're going to be much more apt to go with your idea at that point than they would if you just said, no, this would be the way to do it, and not give any examples. They don't understand the technical reasons for things, they just want it their way. A lot of times you're coming from a legacy system that isn't web-based at all. So you've got to try and get down to how they're used to working and find examples of scenarios that will make their jobs easier by making it less granular, things of that nature. Yes?
With the responsive advertising thing, I might have zoned out there for a second, but how's that working within using the ad server tools or the ad server tags? You're saying using iframes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so what I basically do there is...
Are you putting multiple tags?
No, so I'm kind of creating my own pseudo ad server that serves up a remote ad server. So you load a block on the site for an ad position and pass it any of the variables you define for that position. Through a get request is usually how I do it. And then on the iframe source, you take those variables in and build the ad tag that's needed, that the ad server is looking for.
No chance it's double counting impressions or anything like that because it's serving 2 tags instead of 1? Or
It's only serving the actual ad tag once.
okay.
Because you have a custom system sending to the iframe, and the iframe is only serving it once. Though I did have some issues with some rules and things like that, where when you loaded the page, it was loading the ads once and it was reloading them. So I did make some fixes to make that happen.
Right.
You have to watch out for some of those pieces, especially on loading. Use your Drupal behaviors and try and use once tags your jQuery and things like that to make sure that things only load the one time and only load at a breakpoint change. Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyone got a stumper question that we can to win a book from? Is anyone intrigued for the book? You had the first question, so you got the book. We'll throw it that way. We'll make it work. Awesome, guys. Well, I think we're supposed to end at 10:45, and it is right at 10:45 right now. I have cards up here if anyone is interested. The session is being recorded. I also recorded it on ScreenFlick, so I'll post it as well to Twitter. You have all my contact information up here. I'm not very creative in my username, so pretty much anywhere you go, you'll find me at Basarab. And let me know if you have any questions or concerns, or anything comes up later in the day or weeks down the road that you think about. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin.